welcome back to Anime on the Sea to Sky. This is a bit of a pre-recorded episode, considering that I was able to go through and decide to do this on Wednesday, March 30th, instead of anything leading up to the weekend, considering I am going to be going away on a little bit of a mini road trip just to kind of like go through and say hi to some old friends and visit a couple places in BC that even though I've lived here for basically my entire life, I haven't been able to have the opportunity to go experience them. So at least I'll be able to have this slated for the Tuesday on, the 5th? And then I will be back a couple of days afterwards. So I tried to get a quick one out here just so I could keep up with the 2 weeks. I was kind of thinking about either doing this and like lining it up to release it this week, so it could be like a back-to-back week sort of thing. But in this case, I'd at least try to like stay to the bi-weekly one, even though I haven't been able to keep that success rate up to 100%. But whenever I can, it's definitely nice to keep this going through at a bi-weekly pace so I can at least just have a decent schedule to kind of line these episodes up. So anyways, like lining up to a bit of news, I guess this is going to be a very familiar theme, considering that I couldn't shut up about the ratings and the money that the Demon Slayer movie was taking in. Jujutsu Kaisen 0 has officially become the 20th highest grossing film in Japan, with 13 billion yen through its gross. Now, I was able to go see this a week and a half ago on its opening weekend, and I would definitely recommend giving this a watch if you were a fan of the original series, or honestly, if you were looking for a jumping on point to kind of get into the series, you could also use this too, considering that it does describe a bit of the power system and the specific curses that are used inside of it, and it is a huge action battle shonen romp that I would imagine anybody who is hyped for well choreographed and well put together displays of fight scenes and set pieces, then you would definitely be able to get something out of this. But honestly, you do get a lot of good in-jokes, especially if you've actually seen the show, and I would be surprised considering that the later this series ends up going on, and whenever the second season of Jujutsu Kaisen is going to, it's probably going to be using some of these characters anyway, so it would be probably a good idea to go see this anyways if you are at all or have any other experience related to this series as a whole. Now, Sword Art Online, at least the anime, has turned 10 this year, and while I have less than positive things to say about it, I will definitely admit that this was the first show that I was able to go and have a decent online discourse and conversation while the show was happening weekly. There were not many other things that I could have done around that time in order to get that same sort of feel, that same sort of conversation going with a large group of people that were interested in the same thing that I was. Not as much for television, not as much for film, but SAO, regardless of its quality, was definitely the first major popular series that I was able to go through and join in on the conversation and kind of see what everybody else involved had to say about it. And so at least the only thing I can go through and say without diving too deep into the show is that through the 10th anniversary, they ended up doing a little bit of a preview for the second film, or the second progressive film, Scherzo of the Dark Dusk, that's going to be premiering at some point. It's going to be premiering in Japan this fall. So if it is early fall, I could see it coming out by the end of the year. Say it comes out in September, then I would definitely see it going through and having a release sometime in December coming out to North America. But if it's October or later, then you're probably not going to be able to see anything like this coming out until early 2023. So definitely keep that in mind and take what you will from the series. But unless I really, really, really have a bone to pick, which honestly I haven't, considering that I have not watched past the Mother's Rosario arc. I finished SAO 2, and that was it. I have not jumped into Alicization, or however you decide to pronounce it. I haven't necessarily jumped into any of the Underworld, or anything beyond that scope of the story, but I don't know. It's probably going to be a very, very, very long while before I ever jump back into anything related to this franchise, but for the moment, we're 10 years in, and it's definitely not showing any signs of slowing down. Now, it's definitely one of those weird titles to see, which is still kind of concerning in the sense that we know that Netflix is going to be doubling down, especially considering the amount of productions that they were able to go through and bring about in 2021. But apparently, through some of Netflix analytics, more than half of the members on their site globally watched what their blanket term of anime was in the year of 2021. Considering that they were involved in the production committees of 40 titles in 2021, which was double that of 2020, and so they're really kind of jumping in and using this as a springboard for one of the next possibly mainstream mediums inside of television and film to try and capitalize on its growing popularity. Now, anime in huge quotation marks inside of them, considering that anything that was animated by a Western studio or anything related to those kinds of productions, they just label it as anime, where it's like, no, that's not. We understand that the term anime has been like stretched and misconstrued and like thrown about in so many ways. My personal view on what anime is that it was produced in Japan. It doesn't have to be for a Japanese audience. It could be advertised towards an entirely different demographic or culture or country. But if this is an animated piece that was made inside of Japan, that is what I ultimately consider anime. And so the fact that they're going to put Arcane and not Demon Slayer, even though I think they have part of that under their belt, but they would also put stuff like Castlevania underneath that umbrella is just kind of bullshit, in my opinion, but it would definitely understand why the numbers of that were essentially so massive in terms of their viewer count, especially when it relates to the viewer base that they have related to all those accounts going through. So if they dropped 40 titles last year, I'm going to guess it's going to be probably in about the 60 range that they're going to be looking through and producing by the end of this year. So we're just going to have to wait and see. But we definitely know that over the course of the next couple of years is that anime as a medium is going to become a lot more mainstream and a lot more popular, for better or worse. And now the last movie that I ended up wanting to talk about is that not really one that I've seen yet, but I had the opportunity to see a very, very limited window, which I think I've already talked about before in the Oscars episode, is that Fortune Favors Lady Nikuko had I think, 1 to 2 week window where you would have to pay for a subscription for the virtual Ottawa Film Festival, and I did not think that it would have been a good idea for me to just essentially go through on the sense that, hey, this is Studio 4C. I definitely, go through and appreciate their output, but I don't think it would be enough for me to pay for this subscription, even though it would have given me the opportunity to see every other like animated film underneath their catalog, which is definitely something that which would have been like more than enough of a good opportunity, but it's just, I don't know, it was just not something that I wanted to go through. But at least now the film is going to be opening in North America on June 3rd, where tickets sold under GKids will be sold and available to go up on their website on April 29th. So if it's definitely something that's interested to you, then definitely go and look for that release and kind of see how that pops up over the next couple of months. So now I guess this was kind of an episode that I wanted to do last week, but I ended up going through and finding another topic to talk about anyways, and definitely knowing that the winter 2022 season is coming to an end, leading into essentially the beginning of the spring 2022 season. There's still a lot more stuff that I'm going to be able to talk about in those coming weeks, but for now there wasn't necessarily much, and if I wanted to get a quick episode out, there is definitely something that I can at least go through and talk about with detail and in depth, but still not take up too much of your time. So at least a very slipshod and quick review, or at least ranking, in the sense that we know that Ghibli Fest is going to be going through once again in North America. So how about at this point I just basically rank every single Ghibli / Isao, not any of Takahata's, even though we know that Takahata and Miyazaki ended up working on several films before doing Studio Ghibli. The only ones in particular that I'm going to be adding to this list as kind of like a compromise, or just something that's a bit of a sneak in to bend the rules, is that there are going to be 2 films, which are Nazca the Valley of the Wind, which were made by a lot of the veterans that ended up forming Studio Ghibli, but at the time, Ghibli wasn't essentially a company underneath that name, so technically it's out of it, but I do want to involve it. I also want to involve The Castle of Cagliostro, because even though I know that this was produced by TMS, Tokyo Movie Shinsha, it was Miyazaki's directorial debut, and the only other one that I can go through, especially with Takahata, considering that The Great Adventure of Horse, Prince of the Sun, would also be underneath that same umbrella, as well as Panda Go Panda. I'm not going to be involving either of those, considering that those are probably ones that I haven't seen, but I guess considering that I'm already this far down the list, at some point I'm just going to have to go through and give it a watch. But at least for now, I want to go through in ascending order, basically go through and tell you essentially about my ranking personally in terms of the 24 films that are underneath this very loose set of rules and this umbrella that I want to try and get across, and at least go through. So I guess the one that I want to talk about least, because I really don't want to go through and like waste any more time on it anyways, is Earwig and the Witch, which underneath Studio Ghibli's umbrella is easily the worst fucking abomination is definitely stretching it, but I don't know. I hated every single like moment inside of this. Just the janky CG that they were honestly trying to go through and like put a different spin on, but really didn't help, which even was worse considering that inside of the credit scenes, they end up doing like some really good 2D storybook sketches of all the characters and some of the events that take place in the children's book, and it was like, that would have been a much better style. But no, we had to go through the CG abomination and essentially go through. I don't hate CG, especially it's a lot better to make a series that you are producing consistent if you do decide to take the majority of it into like a CG piece and a production, but man, did all these characters look bad. Like, the only redeeming quality about this whole movie is the Count or the Baron or whatever this demon thing is living inside and basically controls the house. Like, he was the only one that I was intensely curious about, and they only gave him like less than 5 minutes near the end of the story, and it was just kind of like, oh man, like, you were the only like shining light. Everybody else inside of the story was like a wet towel. Like, it was so pointless and useless and soggy and absolutely dripping with malice and just, I don't know, pain. This is the only way that I can go through. If any of the, like, I can't even recommend this on a hate watch, because there's even like, through substances, there is no way to like make this enjoyable at all. Like, it is easily the worst like film underneath this catalog, so please do not go and watch this. I do not want to spend any more time on this than I have to. So these next three that I ended up putting up in a bracket would probably just be of the same. Like, people can argue that a lot of these can like go into their tops and their favorites, but it just never really goes through, except for Earthsea. Tales of Earthsea is definitely one of those where the production is stellar and solid. They do a really good job in like setting up the world, but the characters are just completely like off the wall, like not necessarily doing anything consistent. The big bad at the end is just so like pointlessly shoehorned in that like literally you could have just made the main character the antagonist with all of his anger and his rage, but then just nothing else really sticks. And it just definitely seemed like it was something so personal in the fact that the first scene inside of this movie is the main character stabbing his father, and it's like, I wonder what this is an allegory for, Goro. I really fucking wonder what this is. And it's just not really worth the time. I would definitely say, even though I haven't read them, go read the books, considering I've heard nothing but positive things about people who have essentially tried to like peel this adaptation away from the stories as a whole, so definitely go and give those books a watch. The two that I would kind of give a little bit more in leeway towards just having not what I was looking for, but I could totally understand why people would like them, would definitely be My Neighbors the Yamadas and Pompoko. Pompoko just, I can definitely understand like the style and how that kind of environmental message would definitely be something that worked more inside of a modern setting, well, even in the time that it was made. But it just, I never really got connected to any of the characters. I didn't necessarily go through. The two major things I took away from this film was essentially the the Night of 1,000 Spirits, Night Parade of 100 Demons. That's the thing that I was going through, because that was so cool as a set piece, and letting all of the characters go and run wild was just a spectacle to behold. But then also the fact that the dudes literally just flew into battle with their nutsacks. Like, that is the only two things that I can take away. And even though that sounds baller as fuck, I literally cannot like recommend this going through just to go see those two. Like, watch the two clips on YouTube, and that's essentially, you'll be able to get more than enough out of this by comparison to kind of like have the experience for that film. And then also, like, near the bottom would be My Neighbors the Yamadas. I could totally see this being like a passion project for Takahata, in the sense that it was, what was it? I believe it was an adaptation of like a comic strip, a very old comic strip, that has like loving detail, a lot of good pastels and watercolors like leading into the design. The story about the kids, or one of the kids getting lost and the family having to go back, only to realize that they're like basically passing each other and like pulling a Yui. It's like, okay, that was also funny, but I didn't necessarily like care or just really get invested about anything related to this family, so that definitely made it a little more difficult whenever the movie ended up pushing forward. So definitely something where it's like, if you would be interested in that kind of real old style Japanese family vibe, maybe I would give this a recommendation, but otherwise I throughout the rest of the catalog that they've got, this is probably towards near the bottom of the list, so definitely take from that what you will. And then the one that's just slightly above it, that is also just kind of mediocre at the end of the day, would probably be Ocean Waves, which is definitely kind of like a Lion King-esque story because it was the Ghibli B team that was directed by Tomomi Mochizuki, and he didn't end up doing anything more related to Studio Ghibli, so this is his one for all with the rest of his team. And so it was fine. I kinda liked the potential budding romance. The apparently through like the gayer undertones between him and his best friend completely flew over my head. I had no idea that was actually a talking point throughout the rest of the film, but I don't know. It definitely looked cool. Okay, not really cool, but it was a really nice throwback about just going on an adventure like when you're young and you're brash and reckless and you don't necessarily know what you're doing, but you just have to try and do it yourself. And it's a story that you'll be able to hold to yourself for like ages as kind of like a personal milestone or like a core memory, but at the end of the day, it was definitely like something that was a little underwhelming by comparison to everything else related to the catalog. And it was just, I don't know, it was a fine movie, but by the time the first conflict had ended, I didn't really know what else to do with it. And I appreciated seeing the class getting back together in the end, but also just kind of like not giving me enough time or just enough reason for me to care about these characters for the rest of it. So, yeah, no, I would say it's fine. It was definitely on there because it was just one of those obscure films that was like made in the middle of Ghibli's heyday that was just completely swept under the rug because it wasn't Takahata and it wasn't Miyazaki, but I thought it was fine. It's, I don't know. I don't really have any like glowing recommendation for that, but it's just something to kind of like add to your completionist checklist and not much else. I would definitely say this was a lot lower on my list initially because the hype for it was just so much greater than the majority of Miyazaki's works, but by the time I went to go see it in theaters, it never really clicked with me through any of the ideas or the characters or the specific plot points that meet up with it. And that's going to go to Howl's Moving Castle, which is probably the most controversial pick that I have like low enough on this list, in the sense that it is a lot of people's favorites and it's a lot like inside of their top 3 or their top 5, but just it never really clicked with me, and I never found the connection between Howl and Sophie, but it definitely grew on me on a second watch, especially after seeing Breadsword gush about this movie and being one of the lights in the darkness for him throughout the entirety of quarantine, and it being his current favorite movie. It's like, okay, now that I know someone's personal perspective on that, I will go back and give it a rewatch, and it helped. Not to as much of a degree as others would think, but I still definitely was a bit too harsh on it in the first viewing, considering that I just didn't really get how it became this popular and how it was this massive, but I can kind of see part of it now. And I definitely, even though like everything does become like slipshod and convenient near the end, and how the middle is kind of a slog throughout the rest of it, trying to get you immersed in the story and the history of this world, but not necessarily as much going through to kind of help you be coerced into caring about it. But I don't know. At the end of the day, it is definitely a fine film that I can understand a lot of people love, but for me, it just wasn't it, personally. I probably should have put it above, though. I think I would put it at the top of this group. It was just at the bottom of the list, so I definitely have to change it. But I would definitely put When Marnie Was There like at the bottom of this group for sure, considering that it was something that was very, what, I don't know, the twist that they implemented throughout the story was something that was just really, I don't know, it definitely flipped it on its head, but not for the right reasons, and I definitely would have appreciated it more if they stuck to like the initial like time travel thing that they had going on. But the fact that what I assumed was going to be like a really like well-versed like potential lesbian romance between two Ghibli characters was, okay, this is new, I'm really curious, how are they going to turn this out? And the twist completely like rips that idea from the root, and it just didn't necessarily like it sounds really awkward where it's like it didn't line up to what I wanted this movie to be, and that's definitely not like a good excuse or a reason for me to like dislike it as much. But it was just once that relationship was just forever altered, none of the rest of the film, like the side characters or leading into the family or just the history of it, never really hit the same way, and it didn't really add anything towards it because it was mostly just the relationship between with Marnie, which was the driving force of this film. And when it was swapped in that way, it was just kind of like, no, nah, this is ain't it, Chief. This was definitely kind of something that was a little more of a fault on my side, but now it's just no. I can't really like give it like a higher ranking towards it because besides that relationship, the movie had like nothing else going for it. So not much you can do there. And then definitely one where the style didn't hit me as much as it did other people, as well as the story kind of didn't go through and bring me up to the same highs as the rest of Ghibli's catalog, but The Tale of Princess Kaguya, while beautiful in its own style, was one that never really clicked to me, neither the characters nor the rest of it. I do think that the best parts, or basically the best part of this movie is the last 10 minutes, but everything else around that is essentially just this faded love story that you know because of the myth is never going to turn out the way that you want it to, and how essentially that's going to be moving forward, and the rest of it's just a tragedy because even though you know the ending, at least the majority of the sequences inside of it don't necessarily bring that same gravitas as the final one does. So it does a good job with the aesthetic that it is, but personally towards me, it was definitely not something that I ended up gravitating towards too heavily, and it just didn't necessarily like hook me as well as a lot of Studio Ghibli's works did before it. So I'd say it was fine. Like, I know that a lot of people love this, especially with its style, but I really just don't think that it kind of hit in the same way that a lot of the other works did. And then I guess if I count Howl's over this, the second one, or the second highest inside of this group, would probably be Only Yesterday, where it's the same deal where I understand the relationships between these characters, but because of how naturalistic and realistic that this film kind of like brings everything down towards to put you in the same mindset and the frame of your main character, it was definitely like as it was incredibly mundane, and a lot of people praise it for that being one of its strengths. It doesn't necessarily work for an engaging film experience. So I definitely appreciated a lot of the flashbacks towards the main character's childhood in terms of like bringing that into light and how that has essentially shaped her as a person. But then leading up to all the stuff that's happening in the present day doesn't really just hit as strongly as it does. And I definitely appreciate the way that they end up like pulling it all together in the end, but there was a lot of meandering and the majority of that takes place in the current day. And so by comparison, I would say it's a fine film, but it is definitely something that is for a specific demographic that definitely didn't hit me in the same way that a lot of others did. I'm really trying to stray away from like, oh, it hits different or like the fucking trash taste, but it's just, I don't know, it just didn't work the same way for me as it did for a lot of people. So I don't know. It's definitely fine. I would definitely say, so inside of this next group, Castle in the Sky was a enjoyable experience for the majority of the runtime. I loved the characters and the dynamics and how they essentially flip the majority of it on its head to kind of like go through and realize that, you know, enemy but becomes your friend style of storytelling that Ghibli interacts with in a lot of their like own tales and their own productions. And I definitely like appreciated that, like leading into it and like seeing all the set pieces and like everything coming together towards the end and having like a really good like relationship between the two protagonists, as well as all like the cool cheesy beats that happen in the middle of the story. Like they do a really good job in making this an engaging and entertaining story that also gets you curious about the famed Castle in the Sky and how essentially that will work and why it is such a coveted piece that everybody inside of this world, even though technology is moving forward without it, people want to know its secrets. They want to understand why this thing is essentially going through and living just as much in hiding of itself, but also in hiding of the world that continuously tries to find and unearth its secrets. So this is like almost basically every film beyond this, I would definitely like give a recommendation because Ghibli's catalog is just that fucking good, like as well as a lot of Miyazaki and Takahata's works. So just everything past this point is like a hard recommendation for me that I would definitely recommend like anybody to go see, depending on what you are curious about in terms of the story and if it definitely flights your fancy. So what do we got next? Grave of the Fireflies. Yeah, no, Arcada definitely put it best, where I can definitely see and understand the message and being put inside of our main character's head and trying to figure out what you would do in the sense of overwhelming odds, and if you would allow those odds to essentially beat you down, beat you senseless in the middle of a senseless war, and then just leave you to die, or are you going to be able to move past the majority of it and help not only yourself, but the only family that you have left? And it's a very harrowing experience and puts you right down in the dirt with these characters, and it's definitely one where I watched it once and I appreciated it, and I'm never going to watch it again, because it is a horrific experience to just hope that anything good happens to these characters, hoping that any like positive light or turn of events could kind of bring it around, and you keep hoping against hope that it'll actually like turn out well in the end, where there's nothing you can do, where the war has already gone through, it has already eviscerated the landscape, and it is going to try and satiate and feed on as many innocent people as possible. And the only thing that you can hope is that is going to essentially take our main characters, possibly. On the opposite side of the spectrum, that's a lot more, positive and engaging and kind of like going through the tribulations of growing up, would be Kiki's Delivery Service. I definitely I loved the style. I loved the town that Kiki ends up going through and employing herself through as kind of like the rite of a witch, and kind of like really having to grow up way too damn quickly, because it's like, yo, we're just going to send you in your like early teens down to a random city, and you're going to use your witch powers to essentially go through and find a job anywhere when you're this bloody young. And it's like, all you have to do is go and live on your own and see if you can like go through and live through the trials of not only growing up, but indoctrinating yourself into a society. I was a fucking girls softball umpire when I was 12, and or around whichever. I'm pretty sure like in the years that Kiki was going through, I was basically just umping softball, and she was like trying to go and live like on her own in an attic in a town that she had never been before. And it's like, all right, props to you. I definitely appreciate your enthusiasm and your tenacity. And she does go through some trials and some tribulations, a lot of ups and downs, but the lessons that she's able to learn from the people that she ends up living with and going through and interacting and loving along the way definitely just makes her grow as a person, and does a really good job at essentially not only showing loss of innocence, but also essentially going through and helping these characters grow up in a way that, even though is a bit premature, is a much more healthier way through not just trauma, but through experience. And lessons that only the world can teach you. And then, let's see, what else we got? Wind Rises. Wind Rises is definitely inside of this bit, where I definitely appreciated the romance that ended up blossoming between these characters. I definitely appreciated that kind of engineer's mind going through and trying to figure out, even though at the end of the day, the machines that he was forced to build would end up becoming machines of war, regardless, it is that engineering creed that he goes through to kind of go through, help discover, and essentially not only invent, but create something that nobody would have thought possible in the face of the times that they were going through. Not only natural disaster, but man-made disaster as well. And so I definitely appreciated the message towards the end of this film. I definitely appreciated all the dreamlike sequences that kind of gave you more than enough of a reason why the main character does what he does, and why it is so important to him to drive himself to that extreme, even at the expense of not only his family, but the ones that he finds and makes his own. But yeah, no, it's definitely that kind of strive, where how much work can you do, and how much are you going to have to sacrifice in order to get what you want, and in order to find that position in life that you have been searching for, and how much you would have to lose in order to make that a reality. And so this is a spiritual successor, I guess, sequel, kind of, sort of, not really, to one of them. This was one that I ended up watching recently by comparison, and this is The Cat Returns. And it is a spiritual successor to another film that is a lot higher on this list, but it focuses on a character that was a tinker and an object that had a story around him, but was actually given full form, and the world that he inhabits with all of his creatures and his friends and his comrades, that a random girl ends up getting literally spirited away from, or spirited away to. Just the energy and the enthusiasm and just how quickly it hits its story beats. Like, it is less than an hour and a half long, I believe. So it is a quicker than most movie to consume, and technically you don't even have to watch the other movie like on this list, which is what was it, Whisper of the Heart. You don't even need to watch Whisper of the Heart to essentially like go through and watch this film, but it was fun, it was engaging. I definitely appreciate the characters and how simple the conflict is, and by the end of it, it's just resolved in a way that is definitely more than satisfying, and in a way to kind of give hope to the characters that are remaining and left behind in that world, and the ones that essentially have to find their way back home. So let's see. The lowest in this group, but definitely Goro Miyazaki's best work by far, even though there was a lot of input and help from his father, is from Up on Poppy Hill. I loved, like, in terms of the realistic aspect that is brought in from Only Yesterday, I definitely, like, jumped to this one more, like being through a port in a fairy town. But for me, the one that really like got me hooked and invested in this is, even though it is definitely something that is not realistic to the point of how grand they make this one specific world to be, and that is basically the clubhouse inside of this film, is like one of my favorite settings inside of a Ghibli Miyazaki, just in a film period, because this one building that is so cramped, decrepit, and just falling apart at the seams has so much life, so much lived-in experience and grime and personality that is exaggerated by all of the teens that are essentially going through this, I believe it's 60s Japan at the time, and it just does a really good job at just evolving and like bringing that setting to the forefront and having a really compelling but awkward romance, especially like when the major conflict of this story is just kind of not really a will they won't they, but kind of like a Sweet Home Alabama sort of deal, and they don't know if that's the case. So it's just really, really awkward in that is one of the major conflicts inside of the series, is that they're also thinking about taking away the clubhouse, and if you take away that clubhouse, you definitely take away the heart of the movie. So I'm definitely glad that it ended up going the way that it did. But all of the leads are entertaining to watch. They're all really interesting to go through and appreciate and experience their trials and their tribulations with, even though it is very simple high schooler stuff. At least the demographic and the perspective of a high schooler in the 60s actually gives it a little more of a unique spin, and actually gives us a little bit more things to chew on and kind of explore and figure out, essentially, not only the trends, the topics, and the science, and just the ideas that were happening around that period. And so in that same vein, I would say the back-to-backs, Totoro and Ponyo, are like in that same like ballpark, whereas Ponyo has like a little, where it's Totoro is the fate of one little girl, and Ponyo's is like the fate of the world because the ocean's angry, even though the scales of the conflict are like a lot greater on one side than the other. They both do just a really good job, like having a really good family unit and dynamic that makes them all incredibly like cheerful and calm, and people that you essentially want to root for. And they just do a really good job at establishing not only the fantastical but the real, that they merge like very seamlessly inside of both of these films. I mean, personally, I think I liked Ponyo a little more than I did Totoro, but that's definitely like not to understate, considering that Totoro, he is their mascot. He is like one of the most iconic characters in animation, period. And I would say they do a really good job on both fronts, making these series very homey, naturalistic, and familial. And I would definitely recommend giving both of these a watch, considering that the childlike wonder that you're able to see in both of these films are definitely just bar none through any of these. Well, looking through the list, yeah, no, the childish whimsy, like compared to all of Ghibli's catalog, is just, they are easily at the top of the bar inside of this entire studio. And then another kind of fantastical whimsy that I definitely liked a lot more than I thought it would have been The Secret World of Arrietty. And I think it's because I really like the folk, the acoustic, the harp, basically all of the soundtrack inside of this film is like one of my favorites inside of Studio Ghibli's catalog of work. But it just does a really good job at taking a very mundane world, which is essentially just They are, what is it, The Borrowers, I believe, was the children's book that this was adapted from, and it's just, hey, these are borrowers that are like 6 inches tall or so, and they live underneath your floorboards. And it's the way they are able to make one countryside lodge and house into this sprawling just maze of both wonder and the change in perspective that you essentially get from these smaller characters and what they're able to accomplish in just one like little setting in one house, where it's like same deal, the conflict isn't that high strung or grand, but it's still, because of the not only the size of the characters but the size of the world that they inhabit, it definitely fits in terms of comparison. But no, I definitely enjoyed the family. I enjoyed the ingenuity that they're able to use basic household items to essentially go and traverse what is a large, sprawling world to them, but is essentially just a room to us. And the way that they're able to mold that perspective into an engaging experience is definitely something that I would give props to this movie in general. Let's see, top six. So I've got four here. All right, let's see, where would I put these four? I would say at the bottom of the like the bottom, so number six, I guess. Let's go with Nazca: The Valley of the Wind, where it has. I still need to read the manga on this for sure, but the world that has been crafted by Miyazaki inside of this is just such a fantastical like mix of Mad Max, medieval, Fire Emblem, and modernistic machinery that essentially goes through and has the potential to blow over and destroy the world. The way that they're able to juggle all of that to create like a very down to earth, valley and hill, and as well as through the rest of it, they do a really good job at not only establishing the world and its conflicts between not only people but the environment, and how ostensibly just the environment is not suitable to like give life anymore. But regardless, Nazca does her damnedest in order to make that a reality, and she's been doing that for years. And Nazca is easily like probably one of the top three protagonists inside of all of Ghibli's works, and like one of the best female like leads inside of like a film, period. Considering that she does a really good job in terms of going through and escalating and de-escalating conflict, sacrificing not only her body and her mind but for her people, but for the world at large, and trying to mend the relationship between everything around her. She just does, like, she's so much on her plate, and she does an exceptional job at balancing it all out. And so I would definitely like give this, even though technically this was 2 years before the studio was founded, it's still a must-watch, especially inside of all of Ghibli's catalog, but I still need to get over and read the manga, so there is that. What else would I go? I'll probably put next The Castle of Cagliostro. So it's like, oh, so what are the two? It's like, these are the two. So Cagliostro and Nazca are like the two like ones that wiggle their way in on a complication in my weird like set of rules, but regardless, it's so good because like, as Breadsword said, name me like a better directorial debut for like any filmmaker ever. And it's like Miyazaki, even though he's given a well-known title, the fact that he was able to do this on his first like major outing as a director is a fucking feat. It is ridiculous how fun and wacky and romantic and crass, ridiculous and cheesy, but just to the right amount. It just does such a good job like blending all of these, especially with characters that have already been so melded through what was at least a decade of all meaning and well set up characters that had already been done more than enough duty from Monkey Punch. But it was just such a fun ride, and it is cheesy as fuck, especially the last line said in the movie, but I just love it to bits for that. It was the perfect amount of cheesiness and the perfect amount of entertainment for like one of the like greatest sleuth heroes that has essentially graced the medium. Let's see. Yep, I would say next I would put Spirited Away as up there. It's definitely like number one for a lot of people, and I can definitely understand that. And there are a couple that I think are just a little better, and like ones that I personally think are my favorites. But like Spirited Away is like, what else am I supposed to say? It's Spirited Away. It's like a fantastic soundtrack by Joe Hisaishi, like possibly the best directorial set for Hayao Miyazaki like ever. The themes of not only finding your place in the world, but also trying to grow and mature and like live up to the expectations that not only your family and your friends have set up for you, but trying your damnedest to essentially live up to everything that has been thrown in front of you, and to try and go through and even though every task seems menial, it is almost incomparable due to the gravity of all the scenarios that is not abound to Chihiro's understanding, but she just does a good job with everything that is thrown in front of her. Like, I don't know, like the sound, the animation, the setting, just the setting of the bathhouse alone is more than enough to like put it up on this list. But you also got the town, you got the river, you got the train, you got the little shack that Alibaba's sister lives in. Just exceptional. It does a fantastic job in every respect. And I could definitely see this being number one on a lot of people's lists, but I'll give it like 4 for now. What have I got number 3? Whisper of the Heart. This is definitely looking through the best romance out of any of Ghibli's catalog for sure. And not only is it a great romance, it's like realistic and modern, but you are thrown into like such kinetic energy as the teenagers are going through. So even though they both have lofty ambitions, it's also like not only grounded, but it throws you in. It knows when to dial up the pace to kind of keep everything flowing in a good way. It knows when to dial it down, so all of the harder moments and the trials and the tribulations that these characters go through, who are, even though they're just middle schoolers or junior high, however you need to call it, Shizuku just does what she does out of the passion that she wants to do, and she just goes through imposter syndrome, she goes through the grind, she just doesn't know, even though it's something that she really enjoys, she doesn't know if she can go through and make work out of it, she doesn't know what to do with the expectations of her family, or her friends, or her school, or society, or basically anybody like leaving through. You just can't help but just root for her whenever she's going through and trying to go through on screen. And that also doesn't necessarily just lead up to her, considering that Seiji, who is like doing his best too in a much more niche sort of piece of work in terms of violins and their construction, but it just does a really good job at not only finding the parallels between not only the relationship they want to have, their budding friendship, which starts out as like one of the best pieces of animosity between the two of them, which is like such a, like it was so cheeky, but it was honestly great, to the point where they legitimately just have to try and go through and figure it out. So sorry, this wasn't... Nah, I never did say this was done by Miyazaki, but this was done... The screenplay was done by it, but it was directed by Yoshifumi Kondo, who unfortunately passed away 3 years later after this film came out, and he was the only one that people were thinking that could become successors to either Miyazaki or Takahata, which is really unfortunate considering that the work that he was able to do here was just a masterstroke in the limited time that he was able to give. Although I will admit the one awkward thing that I'm never going to live down or let this film live down is that I watched this in the middle like of a Ghibli fest run where I was not only watching them in theaters, but I was also watching them like at home on my computer. And this was at the peak of the country roads just like pandemic, where you could not, the song was on the radio, the song was at restaurants, the song was being like played on the streets, the song was like hitting up at the charts on everything on Spotify, and there was like, oh my god, it's inescapable, there's nothing I can do. And then finally, it's like, okay, you know what, I'm going to watch, some anime, so at least I can watch some anime films, specifically from the 90s, and I won't have to worry about listening to this song. The first line this movie gives you is the opening lyrics to Take Me Home, Country Roads. And as soon as the chorus starts going Country Roads, I'm like, no fucking way did I just get hit by this in a Japanese anime film from 1995. I cannot fucking escape this song. It was just, oh man, I don't know. It was just something so funny to me at the time. And it was like, it's eventually faded away because I don't really like the song that much. But just that being just so you could not escape it. It was so hilarious. So now I will give my top 2. And so I'll give away the one to me that I believe is objectively the best Ghibli film, which I would give that title to Princess Mononoke, in terms of the story, in terms of the environment, in terms of the respect between not only nature, but man, who not only can continuously expand and grow, but have to do at the expense of nature in of itself. The dichotomy between Ashitaka's rage and his ever, not necessarily pacifistic nature, but idyllic nature to essentially stop conflict and get in the middle of it so it doesn't escalate regardless of where it goes. just the sprawling sights and the trees and the valleys and the villages, and just same deal, like Irontown being still one of the best settings inside of a Ghibli film, was a fantastic set, especially with Lady Eboshi, considering that she wants what is best for her village, but she will do whatever it takes in order to go through and eradicate the animals that decide to go through and live, considering that they will never let them go through peacefully and they will never let them expand. Even though they know that there is a good amount of damage that they're doing to the environment, they still need to go through, and that ever human drive to continuously move forward and expand is not something that's looked down upon, but still it is something that needs to be acknowledged. But it did do a fantastic job through living the world and all the perspectives, not only from San, but from Ashitaka, and as well as Lady Eboshi, and having them clash in the best ways possible. I do think that Princess Mononoke is the best film that Ghibli's made under this catalog. But it is my favorite. My favorite definitely goes to Porco Rosso. I don't know why. It's just, not only is it a mature and realistic drama that leads through some romance and some trials and tribulations on the backs of on a society that is leaning towards fascism inside of his own home of Italy, but the fact that he is a ace fighter pilot that is cursed with a random thing where it's he's a pig because men are pigs. Just that is taken so matter-of-factly by everybody else, where it's oh, it's Porco. Hey, man, how's it going? It's he still has friends back on the mainland of Italy, and it's just they all accept it. It's yeah, I know, you're my best friend, and I can get you a good job. I can get you back into the Air Force so you don't have to be treated as an outcast and an abandoner. And it's yeah, you know what, fuck you. I'd rather be a pig than a fascist. It is one of the best lines inside of Ghibli's catalog, easy. But then it's just how not only is it mature in those ways, it is childish in the most random sets where it's oh, so these children, these toddlers are getting kidnapped by these sky pirates. The pirates are just taking them all. It's no, we can't leave any of the children behind because we need more hostages. No, because it would be mean if we left any of them on their own. They always have to be in a group so so they don't lose each other. It's oh my god, what? And they're just especially the dub where it's all the kids are are we getting kidnapped? Yep. So we're going on a plane ride? Yep. And we're not going to be going on the boat anymore? Yep. It's just so matter-of-factly that not only the kids, but the sky pirates that are carrying heavy artillery and machine guns on their plane, that it's so matter-of-fact and everybody just accepts it. The tone of this whiplashes so hard back and forth between just the outcomes and the conflicts of the actions, and then leading into one of literally just a conflict for a maiden's heart that neither side is well, actually one side is pining over, but the man is just kind of he flip-flops between women it's fucking flapjacks. There's nothing, he just goes after what he sees and he likes it, but it's still it's not taken as a lecherous or a horrific man, you better win this fight or I'm gonna take your girl. And it's just everybody acknowledges that he's an idiot, but the one thing that you can't take away from this man is that he is an ace fighter pilot, and that's the same thing you can take away with Porco Rosso, that he is also an ace fighter pilot, and they're foils to each other, but their similarities are so poignant that they just fucking hate each other for it, and it's just so comical. Especially just the same deal, the last 10 to 15 minutes where how the conflict is resolved and how the outcome of the fight is determined is just so damn hilarious. Where it's, I don't know, it just everything revolving around this film is just so cheerful but serious and poignant but also childish that it just does such a good job with all the pieces and all the characters and all the setting. And basically it was a passion project for Miyazaki because he is such a plane nut and a plane otaku that all of the planes that he was able to go through and design and draw throughout this entire, it must have been so cathartic for him to finally get the opportunity to make a film like this, which would then be seconded by The Wind Rises, but still this must have been one of his favorite productions, just easy. And so because of all that, this is definitely my favorite Ghibli film of all time. So I'll try and get this out and line it up for like a regular Tuesday release. Like I'll have it lined up and edited, but I'm still going to try and keep this on the bi-weekly. I'm going to go through and visit a couple of towns. I'm going to be visiting. I'm going to go through and visit Kelowna and help out some people there, and then I'm going to go to Banff for the first time. That's really going to be interesting. And I'm going to go down and meet a buddy of mine who I haven't seen for a while in Nelson and stay there for a day or two and kind of like go pull a Yui, see all the places that I need to see, and then just head back home sometime next week. So I'm going to be bringing not only my mic, but as well as I've finally been able to outfit my GoPro to kind of like get good footage, not only up on the mountains that I've been able to ski, but also like have it like with a decent setup to throw into my car and like have some B footage to kind of like go through and like show the experience. But yeah, no, I'm really curious to see how that's going to turn out. I'm really curious to see how the rest of the season is going to end, considering that huge things such as Attack on Titan are going to be like finally reaching their conclusion, and then on the opposite side, Tokyo 24 is also going to be really interesting to talk about as well. So I'm really curious to see how that goes. Owl House is still running strong, really like appreciating that and like enjoying all the episodes that are coming out on Saturdays. And now that Moon Knight is out, where last night I was able to go through a buddy's place and we were able to talk about a couple of films and TV shows and anime, but we were able to just throw on Moon Knight because out of nowhere it's like, oh yeah, no, it just dropped. Well, there you go. It's the first episode definitely caught me, and I'm really curious to see how the rest of it pans out and how it's going to go through the rest of it. And then the last like anime only or non-anime thing that I'm probably going to be thinking about talking about at some point is probably going to be Peaky Blinders, because the 6th and final season is now currently airing on the BBC, but it's not going to be going through on Netflix until everything has been completed and done. But that hasn't stopped me from going through and finding a couple of torrents to go through, so I'll probably wait for my dad to get back and see if I'm going to be having the opportunity to go through and watch that final season with him. So a lot of things to look forward to, a lot of things to talk about, so I'm definitely glad that's going to be the case for the rest of the month of April and kind of see how things move forward in the future. So thanks. Cheers.